Over the years, among folks who watch YouTube videos about Star Trek, I've acquired something of a reputation as a hater of Star Trek Voyager. And what I have to say about that is, it doesn't really bother me. Purely in the interest of accuracy, however, I don't think that reputation is justified. I don't hate Voyager. I've made no secret about how, until relatively recently anyway, I considered it the worst Star Trek series, but that doesn't mean I hate it. Hate is such a strong word. It's silly to hate a TV show, unless that TV show is the Red Ape Family. Hate is the most appropriate emotional response to that. And I don't hate Voyager, or the people who made it. I don't wish that it hadn't been made. I don't blame it for ruining anything. Okay, but that's a figure of speech. You know what I'm saying. An attempt to articulate the subject of the video in an attention-grabbing way. I'm not mad about it. The truth is, I like some Voyager episodes. Sure, overall, in general, I found the series to be underwhelming, unimpressive, often tedious, and ultimately kind of pointless, but they made some good shows, too. I'm always the first one to say it. And since I've been especially hard on Voyager lately, what with that Who Ruined Q video I just did, plus recently giving middling to bad reviews of a few Voyager episodes as part of my Star Trek Retro Reviews series, I'm going to talk about some of my favorite Star Trek Voyager episodes in this video, which I am calling my Top 5 Star Trek Voyager Episodes. A title doesn't always have to be clever, sometimes it's just there for reference, for identification. Let's count them down. Number 5, Caretaker. What better place to start my top 5 list than with the start of the series? Season 1, Episode 1, first Voyager episode ever, and for my money, still one of the best episodes the show ever produced. And not just because it was all downhill from there, that's not what I'm saying. Judged completely on its own merit, with no consideration for the quality of the series that followed it, Caretaker is an excellent episode. More specifically, it's an excellent pilot episode. It does a fantastic job of introducing us to the main characters, of establishing the central premise of the series, a premise which the series would mostly squander for the next 7 seasons, but I'm not here to talk about that, and of telling a well-paced and exciting story that injects some freshness into the then 30-year-old Star Trek franchise while also mixing in a few key ingredients that come direct from classic Trek. Caretaker is still maybe the best first episode of any Star Trek show. Granted, the competition is pretty thin. Neither of classic Trek's pilots, The Cage or Where No Man Has Gone Before, are bad, but nor are they anything to write home about. TNG's pilot, Encounter at Farpoint, is so bad I sometimes marvel that they even got to make the rest of the first season after that. DS9's pilot, Emissary, is the only real contender. It's also an excellent first episode that sets up its show and sets it apart from TNG very nicely. Enterprise's pilot, Broken Bow, it's fine, I guess. Of the current generation of Trek series, only the first episode of Strange New Worlds, cleverly titled Strange New Worlds, really stands out, though I also think the first episode of Lower Decks, Second Contact, is pretty good, and has remained a high watermark for that series, which I also do not care for very much. So, yeah, I think when it comes to Star Trek pilot episodes, Caretaker is king. Or should I say queen, because... Number 4, Latent Image. If Voyager had a breakout character, it was 7 of 9, but if it had a breakout character before 7 joined the show, it was the Doctor, played with wit and pathos by Robert Picardo. Unlike most of Voyager's other regulars who remained vaguely drawn and static for the duration of the series, the Doctor not only had a clearly defined personality, he also grew and changed throughout the run of the show. The highfalutin technical term for this is character development, and it's something you'll often encounter in fiction writing that is good. The Doctor is a hologram designed to fill in for a flesh and blood doctor on a short-term basis, who finds himself pressed into service as Voyager's full-time chief medical officer after the ship is stranded on the far side of the galaxy and its original doctor is killed. A major component of his character arc throughout the series is his journey towards seeing himself as a person rather than a program, paralleled by his crewmates growing to accept him as one of them, not merely a tool that they use when needed. One of the things that makes Latent Image such a good episode is that it takes place halfway through Voyager's 5th season, by which time the Doctor, and we in the audience, assume that his personhood has been accepted and respected by the crew for a while. The events of the episode throw that into question, however, when it's revealed that Captain Janeway has altered the Doctor's program, erasing his memory of a traumatic event without his knowledge or consent. Janeway doesn't erase the Doctor's memory just to gratuitously be an asshole. It's eventually revealed that the traumatic event in question involved the Doctor choosing to treat an injured Harry Kim before another injured crew member, a decision which saved Harry but led to the death of the other crew member. The Doctor became so preoccupied with the incident that he was unable to continue in his duties. He was trapped in a loop of guilt and grief and ethical questioning. Janeway erased his memory so he could go back to work, and Voyager could have its Doctor back. But is that a good enough reason for Janeway to do what she did? If the Doctor is a person with the same rights as anyone else, don't those rights include the right to not be lobotomized because your boss needs you back at work? The episode doesn't offer clear, easy answers to these problems. Latent Image presents its characters with serious ethical dilemmas that result in questionable decisions, and it engages with those dilemmas and decisions in a way that emphasizes the complexity of the situation rather than shrugging it off like another Voyager episode with some thematic similarities from a few years before this one, an episode I will not call out by title, though if you want to hint, it's the one about a character named Tuvix. Number 3, Death Wish. One of the things that held Voyager back creatively was its over-reliance on leftovers from previous Star Trek series, especially Star Trek The Next Generation. But every once in a great while, that turned out okay. And there is no better example of a TNG leftover being put to good use on Voyager than Death Wish, the first of 3 appearances in the series by Q, the omnipotent prankster god played by John Delancey. The Q we know shows up on Voyager to collect another Q, a rogue Q, who has become a criminal among his species for insisting that he should have the right to die, which is a pretty big deal to people who feel like immortality is crucial to their whole thing. Eventually, both Qs agree to allow Captain Janeway to settle their dispute, and we get ourselves a good old-fashioned courtroom episode. And what would a sci-fi action-adventure series be without one of those? That setup allows for plenty of entertaining hijinks from both Qs, as well as providing a chance to explore a controversial political topic in classic Star Trek fashion. The right to die issue is still relevant for us today, but it was a hot-button topic back in the mid-1990s when this episode was first broadcast. Dr. Jack Kevorkian, nicknamed Dr. Death in sensationalist media headlines, was a famous/infamous figure at the time for unashamedly providing medical assistance to people who wanted to end their own lives. Kevorkian and what he was doing were intensely divisive, so for Voyager to wade in on this issue at all took guts on the part of the creators, and it took even more guts for the show to ultimately argue, as it does, that the rights of an individual should include a right to die if they, being of sound mind, so choose. Death Wish is a sci-fi allegory told with intelligence, nuance, and compassion, and on top of that, it provides John Delancey as Q with by far his best post-TNG showcase. It even manages to evoke some sympathy for Q and for his species as a whole. No easy feat when you consider that the Q are not only all-powerful and typically undying, but also, from what we've seen over the years, mostly huge jerkasses. Number 2, Blink of an Eye. Occasionally, the creators of Voyager found ways to turn one of the show's greatest weaknesses, its static, nondescript cast of characters, into a strength. And in this case, the result was one of the best episodes the series ever produced. In Blink of an Eye, Voyager finds itself trapped in orbit around a planet where time passes much faster than it does in the rest of the galaxy. Though Voyager is only there for a few days of ship time, an entire millennium goes by on the surface of the planet, during which time Voyager becomes a focal point of culture, religion, science, and conflict. As we follow the efforts of the Voyager crew to understand their situation and figure out how to free themselves from the gravity of the planet, we also cut away occasionally to see how things are going with the inhabitants of the planet itself, and we see the evolution of this society and of its perception of Voyager, how people initially regard it fearfully as a god, then as a fascinating but mysterious celestial object, then finally figure out what it actually is, a ship that has been parked in the sky for centuries for some reason. Because the characterization of its regular cast is not the show's strong suit, many of the better Voyager episodes succeed because they start with a strong premise and explore that premise to its full dramatic potential. In the best possible way, blink of an eye could have been an episode of any other Star Trek series, or of a sci-fi anthology series like The Outer Limits. The story would work just as well with the crew of Voyager or with a group of generic space explorers. Hey, as a matter of fact, the point is, it's a superbly executed story rooted in a compelling concept. It's a solid hour of sci-fi television. Which is not to say the episode is completely devoid of human drama. Two of the best parts of the episode revolve around particular characters, and one of them is even a regular on the show. At one point, hoping to learn more about why they're trapped in orbit around this planet, Captain Janeway agrees to send the Doctor down as a sort of undercover agent. Being a hologram, the Doctor is more easily able to adapt to the time differential between Voyager and the planet, and he can also alter his appearance with the push of a couple of buttons on his mobile holographic emitter to blend in with the locals. The plan is to send the Doctor to the planet for a few days, the equivalent of a few seconds of ship time, but they have trouble beaming him back up due to complications involving the time difference, and by the time they get the Doctor back on board, he's been on the planet for, from his perspective, 3 years. As the episode continues, following his retrieval, the Doctor makes a few tantalizing and poignant references to his life on the planet. He started a career as a singer. He fell in love and lived with someone. He had a son, presumably adopted, but the Doctor doesn't go into details. He developed a strong rooting interest in a local sports team. He was forced to flee his home during a war. We don't see any of the Doctor's life on the planet, but we hear enough about it to know that it was a life, and it meant something to him. And even though he's happy to be back on Voyager, he misses the people on the planet he got to know and grew to love. The other character of note in the episode is a native of the planet, an astronaut named Gatana Retz, played by Daniel Day Kim, always a welcome sight on any screen I happen to be looking at any given time. Retz and another astronaut, Tarina, are the first two people from the planet to actually reach Voyager, or the Sky Ship as it's called by the inhabitants of the planet. They're this place's Armstrong and Aldrin. Unfortunately, adjusting to the time difference is pretty hard on them, and Tarina dies of cosmic jet lag. But Retz survives and spends some time on Voyager, long enough so that when he finally returns to his planet, everyone he knew is long dead. By the time Retz goes home, his people have developed advanced weaponry and begun using it to attack Voyager. Retz is able to talk them into knocking that shit off, and a few minutes after leaving, he returns, years later for him, and helps Voyager to finally break orbit. Voyager takes another couple of hours to repair its damage before leaving the vicinity of the planet. We end on the surface with Gatana Retz, now an old man, sitting alone on a hillside, looking up at the night sky, watching the sky ship that has defined the history of his world for the last 1,000 years fade from sight. It's a simple, beautiful image and a genuinely moving ending to a great episode. Number 1, The Thaw. No surprise here, if you've been watching my Star Trek videos for a while, I've been saying for years and years that this is my favorite Voyager episode. Why do I like it so much? For some of the same reasons I like the episodes I've already talked about here. Its story begins with an intriguing premise and is told in a way that allows it to sidestep the most serious weaknesses of the series. And it's got an awesome guest star, Michael McKean, getting as close as he'll probably ever get to playing the Joker in live action. The story involves Voyager discovering a handful of people who have survived a planetary ice age, by going into suspended animation. While in this suspended state, the sleepers' minds are connected to one another and they are able to interact in a virtual reality. But something has gone wrong. The virtual setting has been taken over by a malevolent clown, the embodiment of the fears of the sleepers. And since the clown knows he can only exist as long as at least one of the sleepers remains connected to his virtual reality, he's prepared to do anything, including kill a few of them, to keep them all from waking up. Once the action moves primarily into the virtual world, where the rules of reality obey the whims of the clown, the thaw plays like an episode of The Twilight Zone. It's visually bold, unsettling, melodramatic, and slightly less subtle than a sledgehammer, but in a good way. A good way. As the clown, McKeon maintains a thin comedic veneer behind which hides a creature of pure cruelty and malevolence. He really is an excellent villain. He spends the episode torturing his captives, which for a time includes poor Harry Kim, and butting heads with the Doctor, who is impervious to his threats, all as the episode gradually builds to a final confrontation between the clown and Captain Janeway. The brightly colored, demented circus that is the clown's domain is reminiscent not just of The Twilight Zone, as I said, but also of Star Trek, the original series. That final showdown between the clown and Janeway is resolved in a clever way that bends the established rules of how the virtual reality system operates, but doesn't quite break them, so that the last-minute twist that leads to Janeway's victory feels inventive instead of like a cheat, and that final shot of the clown experiencing his own fear for the first time as he is enveloped by the darkness provides this episode with one of the best endings in the franchise. It's just an outstanding episode. Well conceived, well executed, everything it tries to do, it does superbly. So those are my picks for the 5 best episodes of Star Trek Voyager, but those aren't the only Voyager episodes I consider to be any good. Just to show all you Voyager Trekkies, Voikies, Trekkagers, y'all need to get together and come up with an annoying name for your subgroup, like us Niners did. Anyway, just to prove that I'm capable of giving credit where I feel it is due, I went ahead and put together a list of 7 more Voyager episodes I think are pretty good. Let's call these the runners-up. In broadcast order, Parallax, the 2nd episode of the series, another strong effort that raised my hopes for the show before the whole thing fell into the toilet. This one's about Voyager getting caught in the event horizon of a black hole-like phenomenon that causes them to see a time-delayed reflection of themselves on the opposite side. Captain Janeway and B'Elanna Torres save the day by being science girl bosses, and Chakotay shows signs of having a personality. Like I said, it's very early days. Eye of the Needle, another gem from the show's first season. In this one, the crew discovers a wormhole leading back to the Alpha Quadrant, which raises their hopes for getting home. But those hopes are dashed, repeatedly, by the additional discoveries that A, the wormhole is too small for them to travel through, and B, the wormhole leads to the Alpha Quadrant all right, but 20 years in the past. There's also some excellent early character development between Janeway and the Doctor that sets up some things that are finally paid off in Latent Image years later. Eye of the Needle spins a compelling story from the central dilemma of the series and reminds us that getting home is really important to these characters, and the prospect of having to spend the rest of their lives stuck on this side of the galaxy weighs very heavily on their minds. Something the series too often fails to do. Jetrel, one more from the show's first season, and the first of a surprisingly large number of excellent episodes centered on Neelix. Granted, that number is like 2, but still surprisingly large. In this episode, Neelix confronts the scientist responsible for creating a weapon of mass destruction that killed his family and wiped out hundreds of thousands of his people during a devastating interplanetary war. It's a powerful story about guilt and the need for redemption, a thought-provoking allegory for the development and use of the atomic bomb in World War II, and it adds depth and complexity to Neelix, a character often dismissed as the Jar Jar Binks of Star Trek, who, thanks to episodes like this, isn't nearly as bad as all that. Life Signs. Here's another good one centered on the character of the Doctor. In this second season episode, the Doctor treats and eventually falls in love with Dinara Pell, an alien patient suffering from an incurable and disfiguring disease. To keep her alive while he searches for a treatment, he places her body in suspended animation, and to keep her mind active while her body sleeps, he transfers her consciousness into a hologram that presents an image of what she would look like without the disease. It turns out Dinara is a doctor herself, and as they work together to save her life, they grow closer in a way that the Doctor's never experienced. It's a great showcase for Robert Picardo as the Doctor. It's an important milestone in the Doctor's long-term character development. And it's a well-told tragic love story, and I am always a sucker for those. Mortal Coil. Hey, it's the other good Neelix episode! There are actually more than 2 good Neelix episodes, but this one and Jetrel are way out in front. In Mortal Coil, from Voyager's 4th season, Neelix dies, and after being dead for a little while, is resuscitated thanks to an assist from some of 7 of 9's industrious little Borg nanites. Upon his return to life, Neelix is deeply disturbed by the fact that he didn't experience the afterlife. He didn't experience anything. He was just gone. He spirals into an existential crisis that pushes him right to the edge of taking his own life, until he's ultimately able to accept that his life is worth living, even if there's nothing more to come when it's over. It's a powerful, frank, and surprisingly dark rumination on mortality, grief, and the importance of finding your own meaning in life. Bride of Chaotica, on the extreme opposite end of the tonal spectrum from Mortal Coil, this one is just a fun, wacky holodeck episode centered on Tom Paris's favorite program, Captain Proton, a pastiche of 1930s sci-fi adventure serials. There are tons of jokes and references to Flash Gordon, Commando Cody, and other classics of the genre, which appeals to me as a fan of those, and which is also fitting for this show, since Star Trek owes quite a creative debt to those old serials, and to pulp sci-fi in general. Much of the episode is presented in gorgeous black and white, and it gives our regulars an excuse to unleash their inner hams, especially Kate Mulgrew, who, as Captain Janeway, is eventually compelled to take on the role of Queen Arachnia. It's a lighthearted, low-stakes adventure, an affectionate and closely observed tribute to its inspirations, and the best of Voyager's many holodeck episodes. The Voyager Conspiracy. Finally, this episode from Season 6 is maybe my favorite, centered on the show's eventual breakout character, 7 of 9, played by Jerry Ryan, who joins the show at the start of the 4th season. Though added to the show in an attempt to boost ratings by injecting some sex appeal, 7 and Jerry Ryan soon transcended that cynical bit of commercial strategy and became the most reliably compelling person on the show. 7 is intelligent, funny without being broadly comedic, inherently sympathetic, and manages to form unique relationships with several other characters on the show. What makes the Voyager Conspiracy a particular favorite for me is the way it takes 7's customary role on the show and turns it on its head. Over and over again throughout her run on Voyager, 7 is the character who is always right, but who Captain Janeway mostly doesn't listen to. In the Voyager Conspiracy, 7 finds herself drawn into a web of paranoia and suspicion after downloading a massive chunk of Voyager's computer database into her brain all at once. Suffering from information overload and struggling to make sense of the data in her head, 7 starts to believe that all of the major events Voyager has experienced since arriving in the Delta Quadrant are somehow connected, and that the ship's fate is being manipulated by unseen agents for sinister purposes. It's an excellent dramatization and refutation of the kind of motivated reasoning and warped logic that underlies conspiracy theories. And given the current state of our culture and our media, social and otherwise, watching it today, the episode feels stunningly prescient and decades ahead of its time. There you have it, my top 5 favorite Star Trek Voyager episodes, plus 7 more that I also find quite good. Let it never again be said that Steve Shives is a hater of Voyager. There are good episodes of Voyager, and I just made a whole video talking about them. Granted, I'll probably never make another one because there aren't any more good Voyager episodes, but I'm kidding! There are more good Voyager episodes than these. If you want to hear me talk about them, and about the bad Voyager episodes, and about the good and bad episodes of Classic Trek, TNG, Deep Space Nine, and Enterprise, you should check out my Star Trek Retro reviews. A new review drops every Thursday. I've reviewed some of the episodes I talked about in this video. Some I haven't gotten to yet because I've only been doing the retro reviews for about 2 years, and there are just so goddamn many episodes of Star Trek, you all. And may I say, in the true spirit of Christmas, God bless them. Even the episodes of Voyager. Everyone. Almost everyone.